There you go. Leslie and Stephen, welcome to the Astroben podcast. How are you doing?
Hi, thank you for having
Wonderful,
us.
thank you.
This is very exciting because I don't often have two guests on. Although I did a couple of episodes ago, I had Sharon Hagel on the podcast, and her husband Mark came in. So you're the second husband and wife, which is very exciting. Let's jump straight in to it because people that listen to the podcast will know that I'm very open-minded when it comes to UFOs or UAPs, if we're going by the new term. And I want to speak to more people who have had experiences and are experts in this field, which I know a lot of people kind of roll their eyes. But yeah, when I don't really know your story, so I'm hoping you can tell me a bit about it. But yeah, I think it's definitely in the public consciousness a lot. Are we alone in the universe? There's a lot of sort of conspiratorial, what are the government? We know that the governments around the world hide things from the public, and certainly, extraterrestrials is one that always comes up in, if you're in the UK down the pub having a conversation with your mates. So yeah, thank you both for coming on. Why don't we start, tell me about your lifelong fascination with UFOs. Where did it come from?
Well, Stephen and I are both UFO witnesses, and Stephen's family has been experiencing what we believe to be the abduction phenomenon for about 3 generations. And I had never seen a UFO when I met Steve, and after we got together, he told me of his experiences, and I was believing him 95%. But then I saw my first UFO, and then it was 100% after that. And we've spent 20 years researching the subject because of Steve's experiences, mostly.
Yes, and just as a preface, my parents come from both Manchester and from Oldham, so they grew up during World War II as children, and so my family heritage is really British, German, French, mixture there of the Rowe family and the Shaw family. And so I grew up in a family that kind of accepted the whole, some people call it the spiritual, the whatever it may be, the psychism stuff, automatic writing. And we had this family spirit guide called Old Glegley that would show up from time to time for people. And when I was 18, I thought I was being visited by Old Glegley when I was living with my dad and my sister at the time, and I woke up at about 5:30 in the morning in 1979 in January, which it was dark, and being a musician, I looked at my piano, thought about what I was going to play that day, and I was fully awake. And from behind me, from the front door, this tall blue-white entity came from behind me in about a second or two. Seemed like it was floating, but it was upright, and it stopped by my right side, and it bent down, and immediately the whole right side of my body was paralyzed, not in a scary way, but in a way where I could not move. And it said, "Hi, Steve," in my right ear. It wasn't in my head, it was in my ear. And I was saying, oh great, I get to see the family spirit guide, Old Glegley, that I'd heard about since being a child. But by the same token, I couldn't move, so I was like 50-50 split as far as like excited and scared. And the experience lasted for an indeterminate amount of time. I can't tell, it was 5 seconds or 5 minutes, whatever. And then it left. And, I used to think that I went and told my dad what had happened, because he'd been having weird things happening too.
But he actually can't seize that memory.
I can't seize that memory. So what I do know is that 6 hours later, I wanted to go to get some food for my dad and I for lunch, and I reached into my right-hand side pocket of the clothes I was wearing when I went to sleep, and I pulled out the American coins, just standard American coins, and they were all magnetized. Swear to God, my father and I looked at each other, and I could pick up the coins with the coins, and I said, well, that's not possible.
It's supposed to be impossible. They design coins specifically so they don't can't be magnetized, so they can go into cigarette machines and beverage machines.
So whatever the field I was exposed to, whatever the entity exposed me to, number one, it happened. Number two was 6 hours later that the coins were magnetized, and I still have been looking for an explanation for that. I have not found anybody that can say what could do that. So
It's
that's
like
still
a
a mystery.
strong electromagnetic field, possibly, but that would also explain the paralysis because we are electric beings, so it could be that it was interfering.
I did not experience any physical manifestations that I can recall as far as loss of function of my right side or anything apart from loss of memory.
And this is only one of hundreds of experiences the family had. Stephen's brother, Philip, actually saw a gray alien in his room one time right before blacking out.
When he was 16.
Yes. And one time he heard what he thought. He was laying in bed and he thought a cat was scrabbling around on the floor near him. And he reached down to pet the cat, and instead something grabbed his arm. And again, he blacked out immediately after. There's a lot of this missing time kind of thing with the alien abduction phenomenon.
And these are happening in different houses, different locations. I've had this stuff following me to at least 6 different locations.
It follows them all over.
Yeah, it's followed people from England to Southern California to Northern California. And it seems like like I always accepted it as being a child, as being this is what our family is about, and I didn't share these experiences pretty much at all with my friends because they would think that my mom was a witch or something like that. As an example, I was telling Leslie this morning that I remember very clearly my mother knew before we were notified from England that her mother died when her father died, and also her uncle Clifford, because she would get this feeling and she'd go into automatic writing. And I remember her picking me up from school in 1969, and she was just bawling. And she said, "My mother just died." Well, how do you know? Well, I was contacted by O'Glegley. I was contacted by the spirit guide, and I automatically wrote it down. So
they're a psychic bunch, this family.
Yes,
they really
it's
are.
something that I grew up as just accepting.
And I think there is a psychic component, or
yes, we do think
some
that.
sort of spiritual component with the phenomenon. It seems like they are attracted to people that have ESP.
What's ESP? Sorry.
Extrasensory perception. Psychic. They're psychic people.
What do you? It's a fascinating story. But what do you think these beings are trying to achieve? Because I'm not denying you saw it, but like the why is the thing that I've always struggled with.
We noticed when we began doing our research, we noticed right away that UFO theory and UFO facts were not aligning. And in one of the ways they weren't aligning was the abduction phenomenon. Theory said that the UFOs are just interested in us, there's scientific curiosity, they just want to take samples from a smattering of humanity, but that we discovered is not what's happening. It tends to be, it's almost entirely a Caucasian phenomenon, for one thing. One study I looked into was
about 9 and 10.
94.6% of abductees are Caucasian. And they don't take just a person and take a sample. They take that person again and again and again and again through their lives. And then they start taking their children and their grandchildren. So it seems to us that they're after a product, something that they get from a certain type of DNA strand. And once they find that strand, they continue to harvest it throughout the abductees' lives. And then they follow the children and they start taking their. So we think they're after genetic material. And we think this is because we don't think they're coming from distant star systems. We think they're here sharing the planet with us in underground hollowed out bases.
And cities.
And in motherships that are cloaked in our airspace and in space around us. And we think this based on our theories, which we developed, which include the Hiawatha asteroid impact.
In northern Greenland.
Have you heard of that? It was discovered in 2016, a big crater under the Hiawatha Glacier in northern Greenland.
I haven't.
A guy from Copenhagen discovered it.
Let him speak.
Mm. No, I haven't heard of it. And I'm not going to lie, it's kind of scary. Like what you're saying scares me. So, it's like, well, what? Yeah, tell me more about the evidence for it, because and also who are, when you say they walk amongst us, are they everyday people, sort of,
There is a certain amount of infiltration going on, we believe. We believe that's what you've heard of their bizarre breeding program, how they're stealing women and impregnating them, and then 4 months later they take them again and remove the fetus.
Oh God.
And then
No, I haven't heard that.
and then sometimes years later, they are taken again and introduced to their hybrid offspring on the ship that are half alien and half human, or
The interesting thing in that phenomenon is that there are quite a few obstetricians that will swear that this woman was pregnant, and we've done the ultrasounds.
And it looks like she's never been pregnant.
And then it's not like she had a miscarriage. It's as if she wasn't ever pregnant, but she was pregnant. So
it's like the whole womb is vacuumed out, rather
being
than
used as a to get the fetus to a certain level of development. And it's and also too, many people have been found now to have the alien implants that have been taken out, as far as like tracking devices.
Yeah, they track the people they want to take again and again.
I see it as a form of necessity. They actually really need us, and they're related to us.
Right.
And we also, with our research, we found out too, with the discovery of nano diamonds in a certain layer of the Earth's soil.
Yeah, 13,000 years ago.
The Great Flood actually did occur.
See, the nanodiamonds are evidence of celestial impact, of meteor or asteroid, and nanodiamonds were discovered in the soil of 13,000 years ago, and pointing to the fact that a celestial impact is what caused the extinction events of 13,000 years ago, where in North America we lost a lot of our large plain animals, and the Clovis people were also wiped out. And the evidence for it was the nanodiamonds, and so the smoking gun, but the shouting kept going on for years because they couldn't find the crater. But because the nanodiamond concentration was higher in the upper northeast quadrant of North America, we surmised that the crater was somewhere under the ice sheet, and it was, and so it's been discovered.
In northern Greenland.
And yes, and so now we know for a fact that probably the Great Flood did happen, because this impact would have caused 1,000-foot-high tsunamis all over the world, and it's responsible for the destruction, almost the complete destruction of all life on the planet. We probably, there's a genetic bottleneck in the human genome that shows that we all are offspring of about 10,000 individuals. At one point, our population narrowed drastically down to about 10,000 individuals, and the entire population has regenerated from those individuals. And so we're not very genetically diverse, even though we should be. And they figured out it's because of this bottleneck. And now we think we know the cause of the bottleneck. So we surmise that before this Great Flood, before this impact, that the human race on the planet was actually quite advanced, and that this impact laid us low and shoved us back into the Stone Age, from which, we've just had to spend 13,000 years crawling back out of again. But prior to that, when we think about it, it's kind of obvious, because the Homo sapiens sapien has been on this planet for like 120,000 years at least.
Minimum.
And what were we doing for the last 107,000 years before this advent? Were we just sitting around in caves and making no advancements? That doesn't sound like our race to me, And so we think that we were a pretty advanced pyramid building, planet occupying race that saw the asteroid coming, and therefore warned all the people of the planet to either build an ark, go to high ground, or dig in, like in some of the underground cities in Turkey. We think
Derinkuyu.
Yeah, Derinkuyu, for instance.
So the underground cities. Are you saying that that's when they were That's when they were built before this great flood.
We believe so.
Yes.
We think that they saw it coming, and in order to preserve something of our race, they dug what we call these deep arcs underground and survived the cataclysm there.
And the ones that were, unfortunately, some people were left on the surface.
Yeah, a lot. Most of us died in droves, and were mostly wiped out.
But what we also found in our book too is just, it's in one of our chapters. We found just how common it is, how frequently we get hit by asteroids and meteorites. For instance, the was the Behringer crater in
Arizona, and the Lonar in India.
The Lonar in India. They happen a lot more frequently. And let's say, for instance, if you have the capacity to see something coming, but you can't do anything about it, and you're getting tired of losing your technology, you have to go somewhere. Either you go off planet, or if you have the technology, you dig in. The Chinese have been doing that for over 1,000 years in certain provinces. They live underground. It's a common thing.
And there's a lot of stories and mythos about people going underground.
Yeah. The logic of going underground to protect, to save yourself from a world-ending event makes a lot of sense to me. And right. I think you mentioned the Egyptians. I was listening to a podcast the other day on how there's just so many unanswered questions. And we put the pyramids at about 2,500 years old, but there are some, call it fringe theories, that actually they're more like 10,000, 30,000 years old,
and we think they're not tombs, they're power plants. We think that's they set them up wherever they go. They set up a power plant, they build a pyramid and set it up as a power plant, a power source, and then their city would build around those structures.
So that was going to be my question. It's from someone, I've never had any encounters or missing time incidents or anything. I do have skepticism about the how much we actually know about the Egyptian period. I do think they were more advanced than we think. Even how they got these huge rocks over 500 miles. Yes. But how do you make the jump from that to? Because there's no evidence that there's vast underground cities, and you think with today's technology. Tell me about it.
There's some evidence. I know it's thin, but that's because our government hides it from us. It's not easy to find,
What will they do, not what they say.
Right, but Admiral Byrd talked about in his diary the underground people he meant, and see, with our theories, you don't have to believe in wormholes. You don't have to believe in interdimensional travel or time travel. It's just good old-fashioned rocketry. It's good old-fashioned science of man. We went underground, and that's why the aliens look so much like us. And Nordic aliens are supposed to be indistinguishable from human beings, from Caucasian human beings. So we think they went underground, and they didn't lose their technology. They kept their technology, where all of us on the surface were thrown back into the Stone Age. And that's why it seems like doesn't it seem like they're about 13,000 years ahead of us in tech? We're not talking millions of years ahead of us. It just seems like, they still crash their ships too sometimes,
But wouldn't you want to live on the surface of the Earth? If they're an advanced society, why would they stay underground? Because even if they
reasons, we believe. The first was what Stephen was talking about before. It's like once you realize that you're safe underground and meteors hit, why not at least leave a contingent of survivors underground in case we're struck by something unexpected. Then also there's the cataclysm itself. The Hiawatha asteroid impact was enormous. It smashed into the ice sheet and instantly vaporized 1,500 gigatons of ice into water vapor in the air. It covered the top half of the Earth in a cloud layer in just a few moments and dropped all of that water then dropped into the oceans and caused the currents to stop functioning properly. When you put in a bunch of fresh water into the ocean, in this case, the Labrador Sea in the North Atlantic, would have had an enormous freshwater dump into it from the impact. And what the result was, the Younger Dryas boundary shows, is after the impact, there's the thin layer of charcoal, which shows that 10 countries were on fire at the same time.
On 4 different continents.
And that's the bottom layer of the 13,000-year-old soil. But above it is the Younger Dryas boundary. And that's an 1,100-year layer of soil that has been laid down that proves that the Earth suffered horrible climatic chaos after the impact. And growing crops would have been impossible. That's one of the reasons I think that we so thoroughly lost all our technology on the surface is not just so much the impact, but the survivors would have had to contest with this climate catastrophe for 1,100 years afterwards.
Wow.
So I think they just stayed comfy. Hey, we're safe, we're comfy, let's stay down here.
Look, as I said, my position on this sort of subject is that, there is a lot we don't understand about, well, obviously the universe, but also our own Earth. We know more about the surface of the moon than the bottom of the sea, for instance. And, the whole Egyptian period fascinates me. Like it's amazing. And I want to believe that there is another explanation to it that we don't understand, but there will be people listening to this that sort of, don't get it. So do you mind telling me a bit more about what evidence you have from your research, specifically for that they walk amongst us? Because, they, what are where is the evidence for that? Because with today's technology, everyone's got a camera. It just seems to me, why isn't there, or is there pictures? Or do you think the government have some sort of control on what is out there?
That's going to be an open question, definitely, as far as having any direct evidence. There's the story about, of course, Valiant Thor that landed in the 50s.
Yeah, we have a lot of myths and stories. The Hopi, for instance, were saved from the cataclysm. These flood myths, they all have a story about being warned by God or whoever, and then after their survival, they were visited by a god who would come and teach them not to be cannibals and teach them how to grow crops again. And I just hear, every time I read like 1,000 of these stories, and they almost all have the exact same scenario, where that after the flood, after the cataclysm, a human Caucasian-looking god comes to visit them and helps drag them back out of the catastrophe and helps them. We think that the people who went underground and survived took pity on us poor slobs on the surface who were essentially reverting back into cannibalism and barbarism. And we think that they set themselves up as gods, showing up with a family, like at Egypt, for instance. Egypt's a good example. The god came to Egypt, Osiris, and he taught the people not to be cannibals again, and they set up a pyramid structure and a cities and put us back on track for being a civilization again.
Taught us medicine, animal husbandry. It even goes back to
farming and
Zoroastrianism with Ahura Mazda. They changed their names, but the end result is the same.
But the stories remain the same.
The teachers show up. Yeah. The teachers. They're always a tall white man.
Right, Viracocha to the South America, Kukulkan in Mexico, and
it's a story that repeats
again and again and again. Almost every one of these flood myths. And that we have the Hopi who were told to go underground
by the Anunnaki,
the ant people, and they taught them how to grow a certain type of bean underground so that they could survive and have a food source. And that's just another one of many, many stories. In your neighborhood, the Tuatha De Danann, or the great scientists, the great Druid knowledge that they took, again, underground with them.
There's a theme. You can see
we keep seeing it again and again and again. And the Admiral Byrd's stories are quite compelling. You may not have heard both of them. Operation High Jump in 1947 is Admiral Byrd was dispatched to destroy a Nazi base in Antarctica that we believed existed. And when they showed up February 26, 1947 in Antarctica off Queen Maud Land, their ships were attacked by flying saucers that came up out of the water, sank a destroyer and destroyed about half of their carrier-based aircraft and killed hundreds of men, and then returned back down into the water. And the operation was supposed to be a 6-month endeavor, but they were only there 2 months when this happened, and they turned tail and ran back to South America. And Byrd was said to have he gave a statement to a newspaper in Argentina.
Yes.
About how mankind had, if we ever had another war, we would have an enemy that could fly from pole to pole in seconds. And we believe that he then went to Washington, D.C., where he was debriefed and then muzzled for his entire life, except that he wrote in a posthumously discovered diary about his encounter where he supposedly met with these people that live under the ice sheet. They call themselves the Ariani. They're Caucasian men. They look just like human beings. And
they speak with a slightly Germanic or Nordic accent. And Admiral Byrd was the youngest, and still is to this day the youngest admiral ever made admiral in the United States Navy. So he had a reputation and a career, and
he was an unimpeachable character.
He was an unimpeachable character.
A local hero. So. He was a hero and an adventurer and
what do you think about it's so fascinating, and I'm learning. I'm going to have to do a lot of Googling after this, and I'll put links in the show notes of all these references, so people can do their own research. But you know that the recent UAP hearing in front of the US government.
Oh yes,
yes. I know it intimately.
I'm sure you watch every second of it. What's your take on all that? Because I watch people like Commander David Fravor. Right. Their accounts seem to be quite credible, and obviously people who are in the military, the top US military pilots, these are not people that have any, you'd assume anyway, they don't have any vested interest in making up stories, and put their reputation on the line to say anything for the sake of it. What do you think about all that? Those, first of all, though, people like Commander David Fravor,
right,
and Bob Lazar, those kind of people. What's your take?
We have to go back again to Byrd. One of the conversations he had with this man, the master, he called him, was how they said that they don't usually bother with us. They leave us alone, and they don't get involved in our wars and our barbarity. But they had to intervene because we had discovered nuclear weapons. And it was right after we used nuclear weapons that the Foo Fighters started trailing all our planes in World War II theater, and as we were developing the weapons, they began monitoring us, and it's certainly the case that they monitor nuclear bases all over the world with UFOs. And at one point, they actually hovered one above Malmstrom Air Force Base in Montana.
1966.
And it was and deactivated all 10 of the nuclear warheads, one after another. And these are all on separate systems, so they would have had to hack each one after another, just to prove to us that they can do it. They're particularly unhappy with us using nuclear weapons. And it makes sense that why? I mean, if they were a starfaring race that was just cruising by, why would they care? They care very, very deeply. And the reason they care is because they live here too. We could destroy ourselves and maybe them at the same time. Certainly poison the resources of the planet,
But why did they allow us to create them? Why didn't they in 1949 stop the Manhattan Project and shut it down?
Well, they're supposed to have met at one point with President Eisenhower, and their agenda was to try and get us to stop using nuclear weapons. And they were not able to achieve that with us. But what they did agree to, we believe, is that we would keep their secret for them. Our government would help them keep their secret of their existence, and we would turn an eye to their abduction practices and turn a blind eye to it. In other words, we couldn't stop them anyway. and we would, in exchange, get a little dribs and drabs of their technology fed to us. And we believe that this has been reverse engineered by the private sector in the U.S. for many years. But the reason I brought all that up was to answer your question about the hearings, was because the pilots are talking about these UFOs following them every time we go out on maneuvers all over the world, every single time. They are monitoring our nuclear capabilities, our nuclear weapon capabilities.
And that's not just the United States. It's reported by the Russians and the Brits too, and the Chinese. It's, the way I look at it is that we're in their eyes, we're basically kind of like children that have a toy. I mean, a really dangerous toy, and,
like an AK-47 or something.
And we're playing with stuff that we just don't have the emotional capability to use it correctly. We are a race that is very, very prone to violence and fear and manipulation, and these are all things that are inherent in us. The greed, gluttony, lust, vanity, pride, wrath, and sloth. We have it in spades. And if they are 13,000 years, more advanced than us, and they do have capabilities such as, telepathy and such, they probably have gone through similar things in their evolution. And they say, you guys don't know what you're messing with.
And so that's their motivation.
Yeah.
So they're dogging our steps everywhere we go with our nukes, and they're slowly interbreeding with us, I believe, in order to be able to infiltrate into our society and change our society from the inside too, to make us less warlike, less violent.
Yeah, the star children and things you hear there, and people being born with heightened abilities at very, very young ages. It's kind of encouraging in a way, but it's also a little scary. I saw this on YouTube the other day. I saw a 1.5-year-old boy that was playing a simplified version of Clear to Lune on the piano. Says, what is this? Has Debussy been, reincarnated? It's like we are seeing heightened abilities, and each generation sees an increase in some way. It's quite fascinating.
And I read somewhere that the human being has changed 7%. Our genetic code has changed and altered about 7% since about 100 years ago. And that's an enormous change over such a short period of time.
Yes.
And we think it's evidence of their manipulation as well.
Wow. And even the invention of the smartphone, has sort of turbocharged everything. And if you follow companies like Neuralink that are proposing putting machine brain interfaces in people's brains, whether you believe there are extraterrestrials or not, I think we are becoming what we seek, in the sense that we're becoming superhuman. Right. And look, I'd love to chat to you, and I'll tell people about your book and stuff in the outro, but I'm really keen just to sort of finish it off with what you would say to people listening that are first of all, people that are really interested in the subject. What should they do? What should they look for? Who should they listen to? And then also, people that might listen and not believe a word of it,
Of course.
And, I think as part of as everyone can look up at the stars, you can't really see the stars in London, but wherever you are in the world, you can look up at space and question everything. And the truth is, no one knows anything. And I think the "Are we alone in the universe?" question is
not
is
only are we
is
not
something we should
alone
be
in the
talking
universe,
about.
We're not alone on this planet, according to our theory.
We are very science driven, and very, as far as we don't go down rabbit holes as much as possible.
I know. Is it crazier to think that they're just under our feet, or that they come here 10,000 times a year from another star system and are so interested in our cattle that they have to? But see, our theory explains why they take people, why they take cattle. I believe they took herds underground with them, and those herds are becoming less viable as time goes on. And so they have to have regular infusions of surface DNA. And we think that may be one of the reasons they're taking Caucasian humans, too, is they've been living underground so long, they may be becoming less viable themselves and require us as breeding stock.
But what would you say to people that are non-believers, because it's like in the same way I try and get people to look up at the stars, and not just disregard it. How do you encourage people to think more about this as a possibility, or just to think about aliens? What would you say to people? How do they open their minds?
I know we do have to sort of presuppose that, okay, from our standpoint, these things exist, and we're arguing a theory about their existence. And if we're talking to people who don't believe our theory, or even that the thing that we're talking about, then it's kind of hard to approach.
As an example, I'm a professional musician from time to time, and I play with some people in the Philharmonic, and I've tried to talk to a couple of them that about the book, and the first thing that comes up, oh, they're demons. We don't talk about that. There's these walls that come up sometimes. They don't even want to talk about extraterrestrials or any of these theories. It's part of it is because wearing blinders. We are good at also wearing blinders too, where we have our beliefs that are ingrained, and it's kind of difficult to get people to take off the blinders and say, just look at what is happening, not what is being told to you. Look at what is happening. Look at what makes sense, what would make more sense, and what doesn't make sense. I mean, so many people now want to believe it's interdimensionals and talk about crop circles, which we don't talk about in the book because we don't know. We don't know. So, I'd say just try to take off the blinders for a little while and do a little bit of your own research.
I mean,
stay off the internet for damn.
Well,
read some books.
Books. The books are a good start. We read an enormous pile of them, but we've also seen every program ever on the subject. And actually, there's a lot of good information on television too that we then would go research further.
A really good book I would recommend for most people that we read is called Forbidden Archaeology by, I believe, Michael
Credo, I believe.
Yeah.
No, you're right.
It's Cremo, and it goes into what has been found in different layers of soil, and it's very scholarly. It's done in a way that it's like if you read this and read just what has been found, that traditional archaeologists say, oh, it doesn't fit our pattern of our belief system, which was developed in England around about the time of Darwin. The current viewpoint of how to filter stuff, it just doesn't fit.
And the book, we did do a very detailed reference section at the end and an index of all our sources. It's hard to give you all of the evidence in such a short nutshell of time,
of course,
but we've given you some of it.
It's great just to hear your story and get people excited by the topic. I think that's the main thing, and I'll put all the details of that book you just mentioned as well in the show notes. But look, right. I like both of you. I love people that are sort of passionate about a subject and anything that involves space, which is great. I'm not going to lie, it does all scare me a little bit, and I think I'm
comforted myself to know that they can turn off our nukes when they want to.
Well, I hope so.
Well, we know they can. Yeah.
Well, look,
they've done it. They proved it.
Leslie, Stephen, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Cheers.
Cheers. And I'll send you a PDF of the manuscript.
That's perfect.